With the passing of Liberty Day, we are now about a week and a half out from the last patch that wrapped up the 60-day period in Helldivers 2, where the developers aimed to do massive overhauls to enemies, weapons, stratagems, and pretty much everything in the game. It has caused a very definitive shift in how the game feels, and I want to take a video looking back at it now that we've had a little bit of time to really digest and see how the changes play out. For me personally, I am someone that very much enjoys Helldivers 2 the most when there is a lot of challenge and difficulty when in-game. I am someone that prefers to have a very grinding and grueling experience where I am overwhelmed, outgunned, and by the skin of my teeth, I am able to complete the mission. So during an update like Escalation of Freedom and in the months preceding that, I had very few issues with how the game overall felt. I definitely had my criticisms of things within the game and certain changes and whatnot, but overall I really enjoyed that on high difficulties like 9 or 10, there was a very legitimate chance that groups of players might not make it through. So going into this 60-day patch cycle, I was worried about how things would shake out, as especially during that initial reveal period as they were essentially leaking balance changes, it seems like they were more or less trying to overtune weapons massively. And I think that in general, weapon balance has been a bit of a mixed bag in terms of positive changes, but also several that I think are not good and are problematic going forward within the game. Starting with the positives, I think things like the grenades actually got a really good series of overhauls to them. I think almost every grenade now has a legitimate use case, and there was no longer this thing of the impacts were just better than everything else unless you wanted stun grenades or something like that. I do think there is, probably still work to be done with like the throwing knives. Even with 20 knives, I don't think they're exactly amazing per se, but overall, something like that slot is a lot more interesting choice-wise. On top of that, many primaries that were either sort of middling to actually underpowered got some very nice buffs within these patches. The Penetrator, the regular Liberator, the Liberator Concussive, the Spraker Spray and Pray, the Knight SMG, many of these guns were kind of underwhelming or just more so passable, but have now been buffed up to feel very, very nice. It overall just feels like the options for your primary choice got expanded quite a bit, and I've had no issues with numerous buffs within these patches. Yet at the same time, I also have to criticize because there are indeed a handful of buffs that I think happen to weapons that were already really, really strong. Probably the one that stands out most right now is the Verdict and the Senator sidearms. The Verdict was the Deagle sidearm that comes from Polar Patriots, and it simply was a really good high damage weapon. It asked for good accuracy as it had light armor penetration, but it really rewarded you with just a very efficient pistol and just being very, very reliable. When it got buffed to medium armor penetration, it has become an extremely potent option since it can now reliably tackle mediums even if you just mag dump into like their armored spots. And then on top of that, because the Verdict ended up getting buffed in that manner, it means the Senator had to get buffed as well, and it went all the way up to AP4, which means that the Senator is now on par with the autocannon, the anti-material rifle, and the heavy machine gun in terms of penetration. And this has caused issues in itself. Notably, the Senator and Verdict are just the best sidearms in the game, and any of the other buffs that were to things like the Dagger or weapons like the Bushwhacker got a lot worse because why would you not run a pocket AMR that can kill Hulks in 3 shots to their eyes? That is just so powerful that I think it has reduced the power of secondaries and made the choice a lot more linear, and that is something that I'm not a fan of. On top of that, there are, I think, also a couple issues in relation to the explosive primaries. The crossbow, the eruptor, and the purifier are probably the three most. It feels like they're not only really good at deleting like light enemies and medium enemies because they deal so much damage, but because they have explosions, they're even good at killing heavies. There have been clips floating around on Reddit and YouTube where something like a purifier is killing like an impaler in 4 charged up shots. So it kills it faster than many stratagem weapons can, which feels very off. And I think that it's going to cause lingering problems in the future. This also comes with the caveat that there have been a handful of weapons and stratagems that also just didn't get buffed in this patch or in these patches. Things like the Peacemaker handgun has been completely made irrelevant. I would say even more so than previously because the Verdict and the Senator are so much stronger. On top of that, stratagems like the Orbital Rail Cannon or even the Orbital Precision Strike both took pretty hefty nerfs because they kind of didn't get scaled up as much with heavy enemies, and even if they did get buffs like the Orbital Rail Cannon, they didn't get adjustments in a way that really fixes their long-term issues. You can actually see some of these things talked about in a video I did previously, and you can find that down in the description, but it is, I think, a problem that does need addressing in like future patches. Regardless, I did overall like most of what these patches were, with just a handful of changes I think being a bit unreasonable. Moving on, let's talk about the enemy factions, because the players and their weapons were not the only things that got pretty large-scale changes within these patches. Enemy factions got a pretty much whole series of nerfs across the board, making them far easier to deal with and overall reducing the capabilities. I overall have a lot less positive things to say about this side of the balancing and the patch, so let's talk about the one or two good things that I think were actually like positively altered. The first one and probably the biggest one was the rebalancing of chargers, because I think it was very reasonable to say that chargers, being such a common heavy enemy on the Terminid side, they did need rebalancing as they had very weird interactions with how weapons and whatnot worked against them. Most notably, Charger Behemoths, due to certain health thresholds and some weird mechanics within game, were really frustrating to deal with unless you had specific options against them. And I do think that overall reworking them has been a positive thing for playing in Terminids and opening up that faction to being like more build diverse. However, it seems that the changes to nerf chargers and making them easier to deal with sort of spilled over into almost all of the heavy enemies within the game. And I plan on actually making a video about this in the future, but to keep it brief here, I think the buffs to AT and the nerfs to heavies have removed the ability of the game to present you with sort of mini-boss-like encounters. They now have to essentially only rely on swarming you with overwhelming numbers of units, because there are far fewer enemies that really make players stop and deal with them more carefully like there was in the past. If you want a brief example of this, something like the tank in Left 4 Dead is an enemy that, if you know what you're doing, is very manageable, but it instantly makes every player in a Left 4 Dead game stop what they are doing and deal with it. And I think Helldivers 2 is suffering overall from kind of losing that aspect of enemy units, because now something like the recoilless rifle just deletes anything except like factory striders in one shot, and it means that things like previously Bile Titans or whatnot that were very dangerous are now kind of whatever, and you might not even realize one spawn because your buddy ended up one-shotting it before it could pretty much do anything. Other changes to enemies like the automaton devastators getting kind of nerfed across the board are things that I haven't actually really felt in game. I still feel like heavy devastators are very dangerous and rocket devastators are still very annoying with their missile barrages even if they run out of ammo. like, overall, I think those changes were fine. It's mainly the heavy ones that I think I disagree with the most. Before I give my closing thoughts and wrap up this video, let's quickly talk about probably the new weapon that everybody's been talking about on YouTube and Reddit and pretty much anywhere that Helldivers 2 is discussed, and that is the Constitution bolt-action rifle. It is the weapon that I've been using primarily in the gameplay on this video, and I think overall my own thoughts is the weapon is very solid. It's definitely like a bit worse than something like the Diligence counter sniper or even the regular Diligence overall. But pretty much I don't think that that's really an issue. Stabbing is very much a meme, but it's been a fun little thing. I would say probably the one thing that I would like to see, and I've seen a lot of people say this as well, is that if you empty the magazine entirely, there should be a quicker reload like the Senator, using something like a stripper clip. I think that would be, a very nice little quality of life change, but I really don't think the weapon needs any drastic buffs. I've seen people suggesting it should have like armor penetration 4 or something like that, and I really disagree with that. If you really want to see it deal more damage, I would just make it like match the Diligence counter sniper in damage, which is like an extra 20 or so damage on it. But anything more than that and like the faster reload, I think would just be like trying to make it too strong of a weapon. I don't think we need a primary like this that is essentially playing as a primary AMR stand-in. Overall, I think these patches are something that lean positive but are still a bit of a mixed bag. And I think my biggest criticism is just that the difficulty of the game has decreased quite a bit than what it was before. Difficulty 10 is something that I pretty much never see people fail anymore. The only times I've seen people like fail a difficulty 10 mission or even fail to extract have been like maybe 2 or 3 games on the automatons when players like Doomstack 3 or 4 spawn waves on top of each other and made like a death blob. But other than that, I have seen people entirely map clear it, and these are with randoms too. Even players like that seemingly are like level 30 or 40 are getting on to this max difficulty, and they're kind of breezing through it. And I think that is because, again, of how AT is so powerful and how heavy enemies really are not that dangerous anymore. I hope that maybe in the next patch we can see some more adjustments to enemies to find a happy middle ground where they're not as frustrating as they were in like Escalation of Freedom with weird health gimmicks and having to like dive in order to actually do enough damage to kill a charger. But I also think they need to be a bit more dangerous than they are now, because right now the difficulty just really isn't there compared to how it was like in Escalation of Freedom or beforehand. With that all said, we're at the end of this video. If you like this little quick thoughts, make sure to hit like and subscribe. Also, let me know down in the comments your own thoughts on the 60-day patch period. Do you like all the changes? What do you feel about the difficulty of the game? Just kind of let me know. And make sure to also, again, subscribe to stick around for probably some future videos talking about like the enemy factions, maybe a couple weapons and whatnot that didn't get changed and I think needs adjustments, and other stuff related to Helldivers 2. If you've watched now all the way to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a good day.